An urgent government investigation has been ordered into allegations of white hands interfering in Indigenous art at the APY Arts Centre Collective. What that basically means is sacred paintings have been reworked to make them more commercially successful. Joining us live now is Paul Fletcher, the Manager of Opposition Business. Paul, good to see you. Thanks for your time. So this probe, do you support it?
Yes, I think it is important that the facts be investigated. There are allegations. This will allow the allegations to be investigated. Can I make a couple of points? I'm a former Commonwealth Arts Minister. I visited the APY lands in the north of South Australia. I went, for example, to Mimily, to Ernabello. I was travelling with then South Australian Premier Stephen Marshall, also a huge champion of Aboriginal art. As Stephen makes the point, you know, often the money that is being paid to artists is the only non-welfare money coming into Indigenous communities. Now, it's absolutely critical that we are confident that the art is being produced by Indigenous Australians. But I have to say, what I've seen of the APY Art Centres Collective, I've seen a lot of Indigenous artists at work. I've seen them at work also in, there's a centre that they have in Adelaide. They have galleries in Adelaide and in Sydney. This is work which is generating economic benefit for Indigenous artists, but it's also critically important culturally because it's a way of non-Indigenous people getting a sense and understanding of Indigenous culture. Because of course it's the stories, the Chukaba, the Seven Sisters, for example, and many other stories are represented in art. Now, it is critical that people who want to buy Indigenous art are confident it has been produced by Indigenous artists. So this review, yes, I support, but can I make this point? It needs to go more broadly.
Okay, so I mean, I didn't know this existed. I mean, I'm just becoming aware of it recently that Indigenous art can become more commercially successful by, you know, a few tweaks, a few changes.
Well, just to be clear, that's what's been alleged. It's a serious allegation, and it's proper that there be an investigation of the facts. I have certainly had the privilege in places like Mimily, in Amata, in the APY lands, far north of South Australia, of seeing Aboriginal men and women doing painstaking work, telling their stories, representing them on canvas or on bark. And indeed, when we visited Mimily, we had the extraordinary privilege, a group of artists explained the stories that they were painting, all Indigenous people, by the way. And then they said, and now we will dance the story for you.
Right, okay.
That was very moving. So Indigenous art is a precious treasure of Indigenous Australians and of our nation. It is important that we all have confidence in the way that it is being produced. So yes, I support this inquiry, but let's also remember just how important Indigenous art is, culturally, artistically, but also economically. And it's important that we support and encourage Indigenous art. Indeed, with Ken Wyatt, when I was Minister, I announced a plan to boost the market for Indigenous art.
A couple of local issues. Don Farrell speaking this morning, he seems to suggest that you'll be getting on board the Housing Fund. Just as a refresher, here was Don Farrell speaking today.
Look, I'm still confident that with a bit of common sense, we can get the Greens and perhaps even the Coalition on board to resolve this issue. We believe that we've got a mandate to implement our housing program, and we want it passed through the Senate.
Are you on board the Housing Fund?
We won't be supporting the Housing Australia Future Fund. Let me explain why. This is a big con trick. It's $10 billion of money borrowed by the Australian government that then gets put on deposit, and the interest on it is what gets spent, supposedly, to build new social homes. It's a stunt. They like using the figure 10 billion, but it's only the interest on that will ever get spent. But it also means you don't know each year how much is actually available because it depends on market conditions.
But would 30,000 extra homes not alleviate the stresses involved with people getting a home?
Look, What Labor has also said is that they've got a plan to achieve 1 million new homes over 5 years through the operation of the market. They're already running well behind that. The fact is, it is the private sector housing market that overwhelmingly delivers housing to Australians, and what Labor needs to be focused on, what any government needs to be focused on, is making sure that the private sector housing market is working as effectively as it can to get more supply into the market so Australians have the homes they need. And let's not forget, 1.5 million people coming to Australia over 5 years. We found that out in the budget, but Labor doesn't have plans for the infrastructure or the housing that's required, and indeed they are cutting back on infrastructure. They're cancelling infrastructure projects. The Coalition had a $120 billion infrastructure pipeline designed to meet the needs of a growing Australia. Labor's in a real mess on this.
Paul, we're out of time. Appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Pete.